We spent a few weeks in Exodus 34, and it's that moment in the book where God reveals his glory to Moses, right? At least in part, at least in a way that Moses can experience it, right? Moses asked to see the Lord, to see his glory, and the Lord promised that he would make his goodness pass before him, and that he would protect Moses, and that he would be able to see kind of the after effects of his presence and his glory. And when he passed by, he would proclaim who he is, right? So the revelation of God's glory is not about what he looks like, but what he is like. Does that make sense? That's what the Lord proclaims to Moses, okay? And what's so amazing is that when the Lord reveals his glory, okay, the weightiness of who he is, okay, he reveals his glory in such a way, and he says there's 7 things, okay, that he reveals to Moses about his glory, and that's kind of what we've been looking at the last few weeks, okay? So why don't we pick up there? Let's read verses 6 and 7 to start, and that'll give us a reminder of what we've seen. So verse 6, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and the children's children, to the 3rd and 4th generation. So what we've done the last 2 times that we've been in Exodus 34 is we've walked through each of these characteristics that the Lord reveals about himself to Moses, that is basically him saying, this is my glory, okay? This is my goodness. Remember, he told Moses, that's what's going to pass before him, his goodness. And what God reveals about himself are these characteristics, that he's merciful. We said another word for that is compassionate. It's that characteristic of God that moves him to intercede or intervene on behalf of his people. Okay? And we saw this characteristic of God on display at the very beginning of the book, right? When the people, what's their condition at the very beginning of the book of Exodus? Do I know? Well, that's never going to change, is it? They're always stiff-necked, right? But chapter 1, we read about how they are oppressed and enslaved, and they cry out to the Lord, and it says in chapter 1 that the Lord heard their cry, okay? And that's the compassion of the Lord, and he's going to be drawn in to intervene on behalf of his people, and that starts with the raising up of Moses, the one that will draw them out of the land. So God is merciful, he's compassionate, he's drawn to help, and then the Lord is gracious. He's gracious. He treats his people better than they deserved, and that's important because Ms. Janice just reminded us that they're a stiff-necked people. And stiff-necked, rebellious people, you know what kind of God they need? A gracious God. And that's who God says he is. Remember, in the context of the book, Exodus 34 comes on the heels of the most devastating event in the life of Israel thus far. You remember what it was? The golden calf. They entered this grand covenant with the Lord, promised to be faithful. All that was written in it, they would do it. And less than 40 days later, they've broken it. And the Lord tells them, You've broken the covenant. I can't go with you. I can't dwell among you. I'll still give you all that I promised to give you. I'll drive out the nations in the land. I will give you the land. It'll be a good land. It'll have all you need, but you won't have me. Remember that? And the people were distraught. They were devastated by this news, and Moses has been interceding for the people ever since. And that's what Exodus 34 is about. It's about Moses' intercession and his seeking to make atonement or to mediate between God and this rebellious, sinful people. And because the Lord is pleased with Moses, remember he tells him, I'll go. Right? Yeah. That's right. Moses said, if you're going to blot them out of your book, blot me out first. Right? So that they may live. And then this revelation of who God is kind of the guarantee to Moses that he's going to go, that he's going to dwell with and be with and lead his people. It won't just be an angel that goes with them, it will be the Lord himself. He's going to dwell once again in their midst. And as the Lord is revealing this to Moses, it's only possible. Why? He's gracious. He's compassionate. He's merciful. Okay? What else do we see? That he's slow to anger. Slow to anger. It means he's patient. He's patient. And isn't that the kind of God these people need? A patient God? One that doesn't just have, or the way we talked about it is, it would be equivalent of us saying that God has a long fuse. If we say someone's short-fused, what do we mean? It means they blow their top easily, okay? And God is revealing that he's not that way, and it's good because that's the kind of God that people need. Someone who's patient and long-suffering and slow to anger, right? Also, the Lord says that he's abounding in steadfast love. It's covenant loyalty, okay? A love that doesn't change, always present. That he's faithful means he keeps his promises, okay? Again, this is God revealing who he is to Moses. And then it says in verse 7 that this God also forgives. And he forgives 3 things in there. You remember that? He says, forgiving iniquity. Do you remember what we said iniquity means? Anybody remember that? It's been a couple weeks. That's why we're doing this. Bent. That's right. It means to be bent. So we were made to give God our worship, affection, devotion, loyalty. But we come into this world bent from that, right? That's iniquity. We might call it a sin nature. Our propensity to not honor, love, obey the Lord, and instead our propensity towards sin. And then what's the next one? He forgives iniquity, transgression. Does anybody say rebellion? Okay, yeah. And that's really what a transgression is. Rebellion means you know better and then you do it anyway, right? The example I say is if there's a line and you're told not to cross it, you transgress that line purposefully when you step over it. That's rebellion. Outright, I know this and I don't do it anyway. Or I know I shouldn't do this and I do it anyway. Okay? And does God forgive that? He says he does. He says that he forgives iniquity and transgression. And then what's the last one? Sin. That's a general term for any type of unrighteousness. Willful, deliberate, or even out of ignorance. Okay? And then there's a 7th characteristic that was what we saw the last time we were together, and that is God's justice and holiness. Because he also says what? But who will by no means clear the guilty. Right? So God is serious about sin, serious about righteousness, and serious about justice against the guilty. Okay? And we said ultimately, this tension in Exodus 34, how is it resolved? How is it that God is both forgiving and holds the guilty accountable? Do you remember what we said? Will you pull up Romans 3, Andrew? Let's see. All right, I'm going to let you scroll with me. That's fine. We can start there. All right, it says, and are justified, that's made right, declared righteous, by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation. Do you remember what that word means? Propitiation. It's atoning sacrifice that turns away wrath. Okay? Propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. And this was to show God's righteousness. In other words, this was to show that God does not clear the guilty. Okay? How? Because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. Okay? I'm sorry, next verse, yeah. It was to show his righteousness at the present time so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. How can God forgive sin and also be just and not simply let the guilty go off scot-free? The answer is the cross. At the cross, sin receives what it deserves, doesn't it? And at the cross, is God able to be gracious? Yes. His justice, his grace meet at the cross. And that's what that means by, in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. Okay? That would include these Israelites in Exodus 34. That would include Moses. Anyone who's ever been justified, counted as righteous in the sight of the Lord, can only do so because of what he accomplished at the cross. Old Testament, New Testament, both. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So now let's move into something new in Exodus 34. Okay? So the next verses is going to tell us about Moses' response to what has been proclaimed and revealed to him about the glory of the Lord. Okay? Here's the response. Listen to verse 8. I'll read verses 8 through 10. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. It's probably a pretty proper response, isn't it? Verse 9, and he said, if now I've found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. Again, that's what all this is about, that right there. The Lord's presence, the Lord dwelling, the Lord being with and among his people. For it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. And he said, this is the Lord's response to Moses, behold, I am making a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. So Moses first responds in worship, bowed his head, and prayer. He bowed in worship, lowered his head to the dust, and worshiped the Lord out of a posture of reverence. He's in all of the glory he's seen and heard, but in also submission, right? To take the posture of kneeling and bowing before someone is to suggest humble service too. That's what Moses does. And as Moses worshiped, he's praying once again. You know, in the Bible, we credit a lot of times Paul as being an example of someone who just had these beautiful prayers, right? Have you ever done a study on the prayers of Paul? Do that. Just go through his New Testament letters and epistles and read and study how Paul prayed. There's a great book, if you want to write it down. I'm giving you book suggestions all the time. It's by D.A. Carson on the prayers of Paul. And it is excellent. It's great. But I think somebody who gets overlooked for their prayer life is Moses. If you notice in Exodus, this dude is always praying. He's always praying, and really, what's he doing every time he prays almost? He's interceding. He's interceding as the mediator of the covenant between Yahweh, the Lord, and this stiff-necked, rebellious people. Because that's who needs a mediator, right? Rebellious, stiff-necked people who break covenant. That's what you need mediation for. When someone don't do what they said they would do. And that's what Moses does over and over again. In fact, all right, so do you know what chapter the golden calf incident took place? It's in chapter 32. We're in chapter 34. This is the 5th time Moses has prayed since then in the book of Exodus. The 5th time he has prayed, and once again interceding on behalf of the people for their sin. And at the center of it all is Moses' intercession that the Lord reinstate the covenant and dwell among the people. Okay? I mean, it's right there in his prayer. I pointed it out when we read it, right? That God would forgive them, dwell with them, and go with them. That even these rebellious, stiff-necked people might still be the Lord's inheritance, his treasured people. Why do you think Moses can pray this way? I mean, it's a pretty bold prayer to pray, isn't it? After the way the people have been, what they've done. So you don't have to answer out loud. I just want you to think on it for a moment. Why can Moses pray this way? Why can Moses pray, intercede, and ask God to reinstate the covenant, forgive them for their sin, and take them as his inheritance and dwell with them? Why can Moses pray that way? Because God just revealed that's the kind of God he is. A gracious, merciful, steadfast, loyal love to even those who break covenant. It's the kind of God he is. In other words, can I say it this way? Moses is praying God's word back to God. That's what he's doing. He can pray for stiff-necked, rebellious people to be forgiving because God said in his word, he promised that's the kind of God he is. He's simply taking God at his word, and he worships and he's praying, and his worship and his prayer is rooted in God's promises. And Moses has good reason to pray, especially for forgiveness, right? It's right there in verse 9. He says, pardon our iniquity and our sin. Moses has a good reason to pray for that, doesn't he? He's just been reminded of God's holiness, his justice, his righteousness, the fact that God declared that the guilty do not go unpunished. And who's he interceding for? A bunch of guilty people. And so he's reminded the sobering declaration of God's holy justice. And so, maybe it's a cause of concern to Moses. Are the Israelites a holy people? Not quite. Not like they were supposed to be. Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. So, given these circumstances, it's only right for Moses to admit it. That the people are sinners, but then also, who does he include in there? Himself. He says, pardon our iniquity and our sin. And God responds in verse 10 by giving Moses everything he asked for. I want you to see that. God doesn't go individually and say, yes, I forgive your iniquity. Yes, I'll go with you. Yes, you'll be my treasured people, my inheritance. But listen to what he does say in verse 10. Behold, I am making a what? Covenant. What's included in that covenant? Everything Moses prayed for. Forgiveness, God's dwelling, God's leading, and God taking this stiff-necked people to be His inheritance, His treasured people. I feel like I probably bring it up maybe too much. I don't know. But the groundwork for this covenant was laid in Exodus 19. You remember that? Where God made these promises about what the result of this covenant will be. That He will be their God. They will be His people. Treasured among all the nations. A holy nation and a kingdom of priests. When God says, I'm making a covenant, God's saying, all those things are still in place. All those things are still in place. Though you've broken it, He's going to make, let's put it this way, a new old covenant. Okay? I don't want to just say new covenant, because we that comes later, doesn't it? But there's going to be a new old covenant. Yeah, right? Yeah. So, included in this response of the Lord is a yes to everything Moses prayed for. The promise of His presence, the forgiveness of their sins, and them being God's eternal inheritance. We could say it this way. To be in the covenant meant to have all of God's blessings, or to have the right to all of God's blessings. In fact, Ms. Janice brings up something I want to talk about. Above verse 10, your Bible may have a heading. What does yours say there? What does yours say, Eric? Okay. Anybody else's? Yeah. You have ESV? That's what mine says too. The covenant renewed. Does anybody say something different there? Okay. Yeah. What we'll start to see, we may get to it tonight, it may be next week, are those obligations. They start in verse 11, the covenant obligations. So, I don't think renewed is the best word. It does describe what's happening, but I don't think it's the best because we see the covenant renewed throughout the Old Testament. Like I think about, well, Moses is going to do it at the very end of his life in Deuteronomy. He's about to die and he's going to make the people kind of recommit themselves to the covenant. That may be the word, right? Joshua does it. You remember Joshua 24? How many of you have something in your house that says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord? Choose this day whom you will serve. Anybody got that in their house somewhere? Okay. That comes in a covenant renewal. Joshua stands up at the end of his life and he says, if you're going to serve the Lord, this is what you do. Okay? And they renew their vows. That's the way to do. Have you ever been to a vow renewal that a husband and wife may do? I've never been to one. Okay? So in those kinds of renewals, it's not that you're repairing a broken covenant. You're making a commitment to continue your covenant obligations. Does that make sense? But that's not what's happening in Exodus 34, is it? It's not a renewal where the people say, yes, Lord, we're going to continue in our covenant obligations. That's not what's being renewed. Why? It's broken. It's broken. Smash in pieces, turn to dust. Instead, what's going to happen is, I think the best word may be that the covenant's going to be reinstated. So think of it this way. How many of you have seen testimony, heard stories of couples who divorced and then later remarried each other? Anybody ever heard that? Okay. What you don't say is that couple renewed their vows, do you? No. Those vows were gone. They were done away with. They were literally dust. So what did they do? Made new vows. They're the same vows, but they were new. That's what's happening in Exodus 34. The covenant's going to be reinstated. It's the same obligations, responsibilities, and blessings, yes. But that first covenant was destroyed, done away with. And yet the Lord in His grace, here's what He's saying. I'll remarry you. We'll do it again. Same covenant, put together once again. Okay? And as the Lord reestablish or reinstitutes the covenant, he wants Moses to understand the ultimate purpose. That's included in verse 10, isn't it? The same purpose God has for everything He does. So let me ask you this question. Why is it God is going to reinstitute this covenant with this rebellious, sinful, stiff-necked people? Sure, it's part of it. Part of it. Well, look at what He says in verse 10. Before all your people I will do marvels such as have not been created in the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord. For it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. God's going to do it for His glory. That's what the whole book's been about. God's going to do it to make much of Himself. That even through this rebellious, stiff-necked people, He's going to do something that will make the other nations marvel. And it's going to display His glory to those nations in an attempt to draw them in to worship Him. It's been all over the book of Exodus. We've already seen, right? If we learn nothing else from the book of Exodus, we learn God saves His people for His glory. He brought Israel out of Egypt to display His power and His glory and His grace. And God did it so the other nations would see it and know who He is and what He's like. Trying to decide how much further I want to go. Let's do this. Had the people already seen mighty wonders at the hand of the Lord? Why don't we recount some of those? What are some of those wonders the people have seen thus far? Parting of the Red Sea, that's a good one, isn't it? Remember, they're getting led out of Egypt. Pharaoh's letting them go. All the people, they just loaded them down with jewelry and gold and silver on the way out. And things look so good. And they get to the Red Sea, and what's pursuing behind them? The Egyptian army. And they just know, well, the Lord's brought us out here to die. Remember that? Wasn't good enough to bury us in Egypt. Just bury us right here. And then the Red Sea splits. They walk on dry ground, and Pharaoh and his army swallowed up in the Red Sea. And in Exodus 15, the people sing a song of praise to the Lord. All right? What's some other wonders? No, right. Provided manna in the wilderness when they were hungry. Even gave them some meat when they complained about the manna. Right? That's right. They grumbled against the Lord, or they grumbled against Moses. Right? So didn't let them go hungry. Provided manna. What was it? Quail? Is that right? Was it quail? Provided quail. Made it where they were just on the ground and couldn't fly away so they could catch them easily. Wouldn't that be awesome? Didn't really even have to work for it. All right, what's some other wonders that people had seen from the hand of the Lord? Yeah, 10 Commandments, right? They received the covenant of the Lord, His written word. They'd heard His voice from the top of the mountain give those commandments. Passover, it's a good one. The 10th plague, right? The 10th plague. The Lord spared the Israelites who sacrificed a lamb, spread its blood on the door of their home so that the death angel passed over their home. Yeah, they saw that. Saw the wonder and marvel of the Lord, the work of the Lord. What else? Yeah. That's right. That comes a little later. Yeah. What else do you think? Yeah. They'd seen how the Lord had led them thus far from Egypt to Mount Sinai and the pillar of cloud and fire. Absolutely. Any others? Yeah. We might just say all those 10 plagues, right? All those 10 plagues that the Lord did in Egypt. Okay. Struck the rock and water flowed in the desert. Yeah. He turned the bitter water at Marah sweet. Remember that? How do you do that? Just toss that log in there. It'll be sweet. What else? Yeah, that's going to come, right? Yeah. That's going to be a good one. In fact, I was going to say that this might be one of those marvels that they'd never seen before that maybe the Lord's talking about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so maybe go from there. Caleb brings up a good one. What's some of these marvels the Lord's going to work in the people that's to come? Snake in the wilderness, Numbers 21. Can you think of any others? Y'all know what we're talking about when we talk about the snakes in the wilderness? Y'all remember that? The people grumble and complain one too many times. The Lord sends fiery serpents in the camp. The people cry out to the Lord for mercy. And He tells Moses to lift up the bronze serpent. Each one who looks will be saved. Okay? It's a good one. What else? Yeah. Yeah, Joshua chapter 5, when they get ready to cross and begin the conquest of the promised land. The Ark of the Covenant is going to go before them, and what happens to the Jordan River? It parts. It parts, and the people walk once again on dry land straight into the promised land. Yeah. Joshua chapter 5, I do believe. Does that sound right? Joshua 5. I'm going to check that, but I think I'm right on that, okay? What's some other marvels that people are going to see? Resurrection. That's a good one. It's going to come. Right? What about, does something miraculous happen at Jericho? Something happened there? What happens there? Well, and all they did was walk around it and blow some trumpets, and the whole walls of the city is going to crumble down. Gideon. Yeah, that'll come later. Come later. What about the angel that's going to go before them? The hornet that drives out the people before you remember that? We'll get there at some point. Yeah, that happens. That was Moses and Aaron and what's his name? Aaron and somebody held up Moses' arms as he held up the staff, and as long as he held it up, the people prevailed against the Amorites, Amalekites. Maybe, I think Amalekites, I think is who it was. Yeah, that's going to come. I think that's Joshua, isn't it? Yeah. Sun's going to stand still. All right? So, the Lord is making these promises, right? This covenant is reinstituted, okay? And all of its blessings are restored. All of its obligations as well. We'll start seeing that next week, okay? And all of this, the Lord is going to work out marvelous things through his people that's going to show off his glory, his grace, his mercy. Initially, all these things that he revealed to Moses, right? Even though the people have seen marvelous things already, they're going to see more. All right, questions? Yes, sir. Right. Yeah. The word is just going to mean something like, well, when something is awesome, it means to be awestruck, right? Like you might say, if you got out here and you chased a tornado, okay, you might be awestruck by it. You'd say that's awesome, but also you'd have this little tinge of fear inside. That's the idea. Yeah. All at the same time. Yeah. We dilute the word awesome because we say everything's awesome, right? The Lego Movie wrote a whole song about it. Everything is awesome. Some of you are too old, and that's okay. Go watch the Lego Movie. Lego Movie's in my top 5. My number 1 favorite movie of all time. You ready for it? Lego Batman. Number 1. Jaws, that's a good one. Well, that's a little more classic one there, yeah. But y'all need to go. How many of you have seen Lego Batman? Okay, that's my people. Beth hates it. But Sim David and James Haddon and I love it.